Okay, so think about Batman for a minute. Okay, Bruce Wayne, 8 years old, parents are shot down in front of him, tremendous trauma. And he makes a resolution that he is going to, make himself the world's greatest criminologist, detective, martial artist, escape artist, inventor, engineer, computer programmer. He's got all these resources of the Wayne fortune at his disposal. And what does he do with all this? He dresses up like a flying rodent so he can beat people up. I get that it's cathartic. Is it really the best use of his resources if he wants to clean up Gotham City?
It's a good point. Never thought of it that way.
He should be running the Gotham City Special Crimes Unit out of the police force. If it's that corrupt, he should open up, Wayne investigations. He should be doing something where he can have dozens of people, hundreds of people under his command.
This is The Dilemmas on Screen, a Jewish perspective podcast, where we take ambiguous moral situations in fictional popular movies and TV shows and analyze them from a Torah lens. So, Rabbi, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you for the first time, Rabbi Jack Abramowitz. Can you just tell us a bit about yourself? Love to hear more from you. I've read a lot of your articles on Jew in the City. That's why I first found you, and I just found very succinct, very to the point, clear, and I really enjoyed that. But if you could just give us a bit more background, that would be great for our audience.
Well, I'm a longtime writer, editor, educator, outreach person. As you mentioned, I've written a lot on Jew in the City, where I'm the educational correspondent. My day job at the OU, I get a lot of questions that they send to me. Sometimes it has nothing at all to do with my area of influence, but my colleague says, I like the way you answer them. And I'm author of a number of books that everyone should look for on Amazon and purchase in great quantities.
Fantastic. Yeah. And certainly will. And I think that, given the how ubiquitous superhero movies are now, it's kind of funny. People are like, oh, yeah, Marvel completely changed the mold with Iron Man. Then I was like, yeah, I guess that's true. I guess Spider-Man was probably the first of them. I remember when the Tobey Maguire ones came out. I mean, the theater was so packed that I literally had to buy a ticket. I probably shouldn't have done this. I was 13, 14 to be fair. But when the first Spider-Man came out, I had to buy a ticket to another movie. And then I snuck into Spider-Man and then sat on the stairs because I really wanted to see it. And it was awesome. I mean, I also remember when Iron Man came out, it was just like it completely changed the scene. And then obviously the first Avengers in 2012. So things got huge. But a topic that often comes up, obviously, is vigilantism. Everyone likes Batman, we like Spider-Man, we like Superman, we're all on their sides, but they're effectively taking the law into their own hands. And I think it's a fairly interesting question, and this is like literally a timeless question, is what is the Jewish perspective on taking the law into your own hands, on these vigilantes? Now, these are good actors, right? They mean well, and they do good things as far as we understand it, our perspective as the audience. But there is some in-world, sometimes, skepticism and wariness of these people. And we'll get to that more specifically. And just to kind of give an easy question before we get into it, when it comes to the Avengers, I realize that this is actually the whole premise of Captain America Civil War is, should the Avengers submit themselves to the authority of the UN, or should they be independent actors kind of doing their own thing, leaving it up to their own moral judgment? So let's just say they said, yes, let's effectively kind of submit our authority to the UN and let the UN tell us what to do and when to do it. At that point, that's okay, right? That's not vigilantism anymore.
I'm not even so sure that they're vigilantes now, because in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, it's different in the comics, but in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, who put the Avengers together? It was S.H.I.E.L.D. It was a government agency. So they're already under supervision. It's just a question of under whose supervision. And honestly, they're debating the question. I don't even see why they get a choice. It's not like they're an autonomous organization now. In the comics, they were originally an autonomous organization, but then they got U.S. government security clearance, and the government was telling them how many members they were allowed to have, and they were, I'm not kidding, imposing DEI restrictions on them. So I mean, really, they're not vigilantes now. It's just a question of, who's pulling the strings.
The way I kind of understood it was, even if S.H.I.E.L.D. was originally the kind of assembling them, and even if they were acting under the authority of S.H.I.E.L.D., in the Captain America Winter Soldier scene or movie, the S.H.I.E.L.D. got corrupted, right? It was infiltrated by Hydra. So they're kind of like no longer an entity. And then in the sequel, the Captain America Civil War, that's where there's actually a scene of the Avengers debating whether or not they should submit to the UN. Tony Stark, Iron Man, says, yes, we should. Captain America is very wary of this. And again, just for argument's sake, if they are operating under shield or are operating under the UN, at that point they're no longer vigilantes, right? Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, but I don't think they're vigilantes at this point either, only because, yeah, they're pretty public. The government could come in and shut them down anytime they want. Well, they could try at least to shut them down anytime they wanted. They're very public, and I think they're still subject to oversight, even if it's not yet the UN's oversight. But yeah, for sure, if they're answerable to a government authority, they're not vigilantes.
Okay, perfect. And
Private
then
detectives. Private detectives are private, but they have licenses to be private detectives. You can't just hang a shingle. You need to get a license.
interesting, good. Yeah, that's actually a good point. And so that's kind of like the easier question, where we get into I think more dicey territory. And now we're going to shift more towards the three classic superheroes: Superman, Spider-Man, and Batman. Everyone knows who they are. They're universal, universally recognized. They probably have the most number of movies. Fine. So those three, they are not operating under government authority. Spider-Man, definitely not. Superman, who's going to control him? He definitely works in tandem with the law. And obviously Batman often works with, with Commissioner Gordon or whatever, Officer Gordon. So they definitely work in tandem, but they're taking the law into their own hands. Just as a kind of broad overview, and then we'll start going into the nitty gritty. What is the Jewish perspective on taking the law into your own hands? Is Judaism okay with this or not?
Clearly, we're not okay with taking the law into your own hands because that defeats the purpose of having law. There are two cases that I think are popularly thought of as vigilantism. One is the Goel Hadam, which is typically translated as the blood avenger, and that's in a case when someone commits manslaughter, not intentional murder, but negligent homicide, and that person gets exiled to a city of refuge. But if he's caught outside the city of refuge, then the relative of the person who was killed has permission to take the law into his own hands, as you put it, and execute him. And if that blood avenger goes into the city, or if after the person's term of exile is over, the blood avenger takes action, then of course he would be guilty of murder. The other case is the case of Pinchas. Pinchas, you may recall, impaled Zimri when he was publicly committing a certain offense, and the sages discuss how was he able to do this. They don't put him on trial, and they answer Kanayim Pogimbo, that in certain situations a zealot, someone who's so overcome with passion for God, can take the law into his own hands and execute someone who's publicly desecrating God's name. But again, they clarify, if someone would take the time and go to the local court and say, am I allowed to kill this guy who's doing this thing? The answer would be no. It has to be zeal that does it. So both of these are cases where it appears to be vigilante justice. It appears to be somebody acting extra legally, but in fact, it's not. These are two cases where people are allowed by law to act unilaterally. That's what it is. And they have to do it within certain parameters. And if they go outside those parameters, then they are the liable ones. They are going to be held up in court for murder. So we definitely don't agree with overt vigilantism. There are certain cases where we do permit people to act in a way that others would not be permitted to act because of the circumstances. But that's not a blanket blind eye to people taking the law in their own hands.
That's fair. And then turning to for a moment to the second case where like Pinchas kind of acted with zeal. A zealot is allowed to take the law into his own hands. I think people would understandably be a little nervous about that. Like are there parameters to that? I mean, the people acting with religious zeal, I think, be like, yeah, as long as you're acting as a religious zealot, then you're good to go. People, I think, would be very uncomfortable. I mean, there must be limits to that. I can't imagine Judaism just giving a carte blanche to anyone to act that way.
Well, there are absolutely limits to when that can be exercised. First of all, it has to be at the time of the public desecration of God's name. And there are certain things that qualify as such a desecration. And as with other legal cases, there has to be warning, there have to be witnesses. So it's not like, you see something you don't like, you can just pull out a gun and shoot somebody. That is absolutely not the case. There are very strict legal parameters. But even putting that aside, that's only, in the biblical era model of justice. If you're walking in Borough Park or in Muncie or in some other Jewish community and you take this law into your own hands, you're still going to go to jail because we're not operating under that legal system. So it's not a justification in any practical, even in Israel nowadays. It would not be considered any justification for any act of violence against someone, no matter what they're doing. So, yeah, in the Torah legal system, there are very strict, limited parameters when this can be done. And you know what? If you're not a zealot, you're not going to get away with it. There are very few zealots.
That's fair. Like who are like truly doing it for the right reasons, I guess.
Sincerely, passionately upset about the desecration of God's name. Exactly right. Just being a religious fanatic is not sufficient. You have to be, yeah.
Let's be real.
Yeah.
You're speaking about those two cases, so it's kind of interesting. Even in that case, it doesn't sound like we would call that acting like a village vigilante because it's effectively permissible by law. I guess, can we actually just double click on that? So you're a vigilante, but it's legally permissible. So
it's not a vigilante. It's unilaterally. That's the thing. The law allows, in these two cases, in the case of Kanaim and in the case of the Goal Hadam, it allows for unilateral action that would not otherwise be permitted. But even those unilateral actions have legal parameters. So they're within the law.
Oh, got it. I'm actually thinking, I wonder if this is a similar case. It's kind of like if you're a shopkeeper and someone is shoplifting, you normally do not have the right to restrain a person and restrict their freedom of movement. In this very specific limited case, you are allowed to restrict them until you call a legal authority, but otherwise you have to tread very carefully when it comes to effectively seizing possession of a person's body or person. You can't just hold them. You have effectively, the law allows you to act unilaterally to hold someone until you're able to, in this specific case, involve the authorities. I know that's not.
That is an excellent analogy.
So this leads into actually another question I had was, I remember this is like my second year in yeshiva. I was just a few months in because I came late the first year. But in Bava Kama, right, one of the tractates of the Talmud, there is a case that I thought was very interesting where they literally talk about is like a person allowed to take the law into their own hands. Now it's a machlokes or it's an argument, but the case there, if I'm recalling correctly, was, say John steals the property of somebody else and somebody else wants to go and take it back. And so the question is, are you allowed to do you have to wait and go to the court and tell the court and be like, hey, this guy stole from me. Can you please, start a legal action, or can you just or can the person who was stolen from go into John's house, the thief, and take it away from them? So, I know this is not obviously operating on the level of the Avengers or Batman, who goes in and is effectively trying to take down all of hidden crime or trying to save the world. But can we comment on that briefly? I'm not sure if that's exactly a relevant case, but just since that's literally the wording used in the Gemara in the Talmud, where is a person allowed to take the law into their own hands or not? So can we just comment on that real quick?
Well, I don't have a lot to say on that because, as you mentioned, it is a machlokus. There is a difference of opinion. And in terms of practical law, I'm pretty sure we don't act that way. I'm pretty sure one is not allowed to do it. So it's really an academic question. I'm reminded of the case of a lender. Let's say that John, Paul, and George. John is a lender, let's say.
So is it, just for fun, John, Paul, and George, the Beatles?
Yeah, well, I was just using names as an example. I picked a group of four. Okay, so let's say that John owes $100 each to Paul, George, and Ringo. Okay, and they're not going to be able to collect in court because they don't have witnesses. So Paul says, you know what? I'll say he owes me $300 and you two will be witnesses. And then we'll collect $300 and split it up 100 each. Now, if that happened, that would be a fair distribution of money. Everyone would get what they actually deserve. But that's strictly not allowed because it's not true. And we're not allowed to twist the law in order to get even a righteous outcome. So I'm pretty sure, bottom line, we're not allowed to steal back, even though it belongs to us. I'm pretty sure we have to go through proper legal channels for that. Don't quote me. Oh, actually, I'm pretty public right now, but I'm not ruling in practical matters. But I'm pretty sure that is the bottom line law, and that the opinion that says otherwise is just that, an opinion.
Okay, very good. Thanks.
Even the fact that they're discussing, is he allowed to take the law in his own hands? The fact that the law is ruling that he's allowed to would mean that he's still operating within an exceptional area of law, but within an area of law nonetheless. If he's not allowed to, then again, he's going to find himself in court. But still, the court has an opinion on whether or not this is allowed.
That is really interesting because I guess when you first see that, it's like, oh, cool, I'm allowed to take the law into their own hands. But like you're saying, that's true, but within specific legal parameters. This isn't a free-for-all. I like the way you put it. Am I allowed to act unilaterally? Can I act effectively without the explicit permission of the court?
When your wife is giving birth and you're driving 80 miles an hour, you're taking the law into your own hands. You're making a judgment call. They will turn a blind eye to it in such a case, most likely. So there are situations even in civil law where extenuating circumstances, we understand.
I just need to ask one clarification question. So when it comes to, I guess to be clear, so Superman and Batman and Spider-Man, when they're taking the law into their own hands, are they allowed to do that according to Jewish law? I understand no, but if there's something I misunderstand, can we just clear that up before we move on?
They're not allowed to take the law into their own hands. There are obviously certain situations where people can act, a citizen's arrest situation like that. Someone's in imminent danger. You save that person. Superman, Batman, and Spider-Man, they do take the law into their own hands. And there are certain situations, where you could justify their actions. Obviously, if they witness a crime in action, and they're acting to save people and property. I think anyone who has the possibility of assisting in situation is justified, if not more, in doing so. If someone's falling off a bridge and you catch them, obviously anyone who could save such a person should do so. I think they go out looking for trouble, and I think that's where the line is. I don't think that they should be like Batman, for example, prowling the night, looking for criminals. I don't think that's his job. It's one thing if Bruce Wayne is in the bank and somebody pulls out a Tommy gun. It's something else if he's on a rooftop and he swings in through a window and kicks some guy in the head who's robbing a safe. I think that's a case where you call the police and let them do their jobs. If you saw that situation and you swung in through a window and kicked the guy in the back of the head, I think you'd get in trouble for that, not a medal.
Right. That's fair enough. I guess with Superman and Spider-Man, I actually don't think that this is an issue, but just, again, focusing on Batman just for a moment, is I think one of the issues is because Gotham is so corrupt, there almost needs to be some kind of like third party coming in. Unless, again, so would that justify his actions? Like, I'm just cleaning it up until I can retire. Once the government actually can handle this, like the police are so corrupt that like, effectively they're hand in hand with the criminals. Does that change the situation?
So think about Batman for a minute. Okay, Bruce Wayne, 8 years old, parents are shot down in front of him, tremendous trauma. And he makes a resolution that he is going to, make himself the world's greatest criminologist. He's the world's greatest detective. He's a world-class martial artist. He's a master of disguise. He's an escape artist. He's an inventor. He's an engineer. He's a computer programmer. He can design and build cars and other things. He's got all these resources of the Wayne fortune at his disposal. He travels the world getting all these skills somehow off the radar. No one's aware that he's done any of this. Okay. And what does he do with all this? He dresses up like a flying rodent so he can beat people up. I get that it's cathartic. Is it really the best use of his resources if he wants to clean up Gotham City?
That's good. It's a good point. Never thought of it that way.
He should be running the Gotham City Special Crimes Unit out of the police force. If it's that corrupt, he should open up, Wayne investigations. He should be doing something where he can have dozens of people, hundreds of people under his command, equally well trained, perhaps not masters of every discipline, which any one of which would take a lifetime to master, and he's got them all by the time he's 29. It's just, obviously he's a special talent, and I don't think, going after the Mad Hatter and Poison Ivy is the best use of his skills.
It's kind of hard to argue with that. That's exceptionally well put. No further questions. That addresses, I guess, like almost the central question. But now I want to start going into kind of slightly more nitty-gritty territory. There's a lot of discussion, again, because, Batman and Superman and Spider-Man are dealing with, bad actors, and especially Batman. This is kind of where I want to double click on Batman right now is, should they have their own moral code? And just to flesh out the question a little bit is, I watched The Dark Knight, the whole series, Batman Begins, The Dark Knight Rises, and there's a lot of commentary on the Joker and Bane were able to do a lot of damage and kill a lot of people because Batman would not just kill the Joker and Bane when he had the chance. Just take a gun and shoot them down, or however it is that you want to do. But Batman, in order to kind of keep himself in check, in order to make sure he doesn't effectively become the criminals he's trying to fight, he effectively wants to maintain the sensitivity, and he has to have a do not cross line. And there are people who criticize this. They're like, if you had just killed them, this whole disaster would never have unfolded. And it's especially pointed in the case of Bane in that third movie, Dark Knight Rises, because, they're slugging it out, they're beating each other up, and then Catwoman comes and just kills Bane, then threat is over. That's it. That's all it took. Why doesn't Batman just do it? And I guess what I'm curious about is, does Judaism agree with this principle? Like, if they operate in this fashion, are they allowed to effectively have a line they cannot cross?
I don't think vigilantes should be vigilantes. But if they're going to be vigilantes, then yeah, I'm glad they're not going around killing people. And I'm glad they're not making the decision of who they can kill and who they can't kill. And by the way, back in the day, back in the 1930s and 40s, Batman and Superman did kill people. They did. Superman wasn't always the golden child that he is now. In the earliest comics, 1930s, the cops were shooting at him whenever they saw him because he was a vigilante. And Batman, he doesn't carry a gun now, but back in the day, he carried guns. There's a famous scene of him in a biplane, like, with a machine gun, gunning down the bad guys, So, yeah, I would not want to embolden vigilantes. And certainly I wouldn't want to say, oh, yeah, of course they should kill. If Bane or the Joker is still running around after being captured and escaping 14 times, maybe that's on the government, maybe that's on the authorities, and not on the vigilante. And by the way, Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, nothing they do would hold up in court. They don't have due process. They don't have warrants. They don't stick around to testify. They certainly don't show up in court. And they would have the right to face their accuser. So, yeah, if you find two guys webbed to a light pole with a note that says, your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, what are the cops going to do with that? So I'm not even sure how effective they are. So, yes, when Superman saves the world from Brainiac or Mongol or whoever, I'm grateful for that. I don't know what they're accomplishing when they tie up muggers and leave them for the cops.
Right. That's actually a good point. And one thing that I definitely did not appreciate when I first saw The Dark Knight was when that Chinese guy, I think in Hong Kong, Batman goes after him in Hong Kong, and because the guy who's storing all of the mob's money leaves the US and goes to Hong Kong because they know that China will never extradite a Chinese national. So Batman, who knows doesn't recognize jurisdiction, goes and effectively takes him and brings him back to the US. Now, perhaps as a lawyer, but I was like, this would be an international incident. And we have this vigilante crazy going off. And at first, even within the United States, Batman, the FBI would probably get involved and try to shut this guy down. That's one. But two, once you start crossing international lines and you kidnap a Chinese guy and bring him back to the US, I was like, this would be a disaster. But again, of course, just for internal, look, the movie is amazing. All right. It's a lot of fun to watch and to not have to think about these things. But like you're saying, there are legal ramifications to a person kidnapping someone or tying them up to poles. Like, you need to work through through due process.
All of these movies require a huge willing suspension of disbelief. And not just you'll believe a man can fly. You have to believe that people will not act in a way that they would act in the real world.
What do you mean?
Well, like you were saying, that Batman could kidnap a Chinese national and not have it be an international incident. For the movie to happen, you have to accept just people are going to behave unnatural. And everything with Superman, by the way. What does Superman do for a living?
Right. Isn't he a farmer?
He's a reporter. Works for the Daily Planet.
Sorry.
Newspaper.
Sorry,
yeah.
He grew up as a farmer. Sorry, now he's a reporter.
Yes. But his day job, he's a reporter. So he hangs around with Lois Lane, Jimmy Olsen, Perry White, Ron Troop, all these guys. Okay, they are reporters. Reporters are trained observers. If I knew you and I saw you without your glasses, I might recognize you. But we have to accept they don't recognize the guy they work with every day when he's wearing different clothes. Okay.
Yeah, I've heard that. I always have had a hard time with that. And people will try to say oh no, can't you see the way his whole demeanor changes when he takes off his glasses? I'm like, come on. Well,
Or you
eventually,
say
yeah,
at least, the very least, hey, you know what? You look a lot like Superman. I mean, just
all right, yeah, that's true. Yeah, just but don't pretend that nobody recognizes him. That's a good point.
maybe they're just being polite. They don't really want to get burnt up with his heat vision. So you stay on
Right.
Superman's good side, you roll with it.
Yeah, fair enough. I actually kind of want to almost return back to the same question in terms of should they have a line that they should not cross. So I think you were speaking kind of more practically, like, yes, we don't want them to go around killing people. But one thing I thought was really interesting was kind of like people's perspective on Batman was we are concerned that if it's almost like he's concerned about his own like desensitization. Like if he starts killing people, then he'll kind of be, and that's an interesting point about what it was like back in like the earliest, like, in the 30s and 40s when it was first coming out. But then later on, Batman kind of, quote unquote, evolved, and now he doesn't do that. So I thought it was just an interesting.
That comics got scrutinized and sanitized. I mean, he already wasn't killing people by that point, but yeah, he went very much from being a vigilante to being a deputy of the law. I mean, Gotham City, they have on their rooftop something to signal this guy. He's clearly working under the auspices of the police. Could you imagine if in New York City on one police plaza they had a signal to call for some vigilante to come and do their job for them? It would be a scandal. So
Right.
obviously, even Batman has some degree of official capacity, which is why if he doesn't have a warrant and if he doesn't Mirandize people, I don't know how anything he does sticks.
Part of the point is that's almost he definitely wants to get people in jail, but it's also just to terrorize the criminals who are terrorizing the city. In terms of once they're scared enough, then maybe they'll stop acting.
That he does well.
But there is this idea of like we want Superman to still kind of hold life sacred. You want Batman to kind of be in a good emotional space. When he starts killing people, it might kind of start sending him off the rails. There is this idea of sensitization. So on the one hand, we want him to kill the Joker and Bane. If he's able to, if he's the only person who can in that specific context, and we know that they're going to go around killing more people, he should kill them. But on the other hand, we also want him to like have a line he should not cross. In terms of the sensitization, is that like a Jewish idea that like if Jewish law allows you to do something, but you're like, I'm too sensitive for that. Like I'm concerned about how I will react if I do something, even if it was permitted or even perhaps obligated by the law. Because I remember there's this one idea of like, for example, like Moshe Rabbeinu, right? Moshe would not strike the river to turn it into blood for the plagues. And the reason why is because, well, the river saved him. The river Nile, when he was a baby, he was put on the river Nile in the basket. And because the river saved him, he would not strike the river out of a sense of gratitude because he wanted to keep himself sensitive. So that's like one example of, but that's a good thing for the river. He's, doing God's will. He's bringing the Makos. Like the Egyptians did not treat him well. So that's what he should be doing, but he doesn't do it. Aaron does it, his brother. Where do we hold the line of things you should do, but don't do out of personal sensitization?
Okay, so first of all, the not striking of the Nile and of the land is not a criticism of Moshe; it's a praise of Moshe. It's not as if he held up the redemption from Egypt from happening through his stubborn refusal to do what he was supposed to do. He and Aaron were partners, so it's sort of like well, I can't strike the Nile; I owe it a debt. You do it. Because there were some things that happened through Moshe and some things that happened through Aaron, and that was fine. So those things are said as a praise of Moshe, that because he had such great sensitivity, he couldn't be the vehicle to take a whack at something that he owed a debt to. But yeah, there is a concept, the concept of chassid shota, which means a pious idiot. And that's a case where, in Judaism, men and women, have certain degree of separation, and we don't, embrace women who are not our wives and things like that. So if a woman is drowning and there's this very religious person standing on the shore who has the physical ability to jump in and save her, but he doesn't because, how can I touch a woman? That's called being a pious idiot. And he's not allowed to let his own religious sentiment stop him from doing what needs doing. It's an obligation to save a person who is in imminent danger, and to say, well, I'm too religious; it offends my morals. No, then your morals are askew. Your morals are are not in line. There are times, like I said, when you're going 80 miles an hour to get your wife to the hospital because she's having a baby, you don't say, "No, sorry, honey, the speed limit is 35." You speed, maybe not 80, but you certainly go faster than 35. So there are times where even if you are the most moral person, you have to do the greater good, not what would be your preference. And that's the difference. But I don't think that's the same when it comes to Batman, shooting the Joker in the head. Yes, long term, that would save a lot of lives, but that's not Batman's call to make because the guy's subdued. We don't kill prisoners. If a cop did that, the cop would, at the very least, be drummed out of the force. He would probably go to prison. We don't shoot people after they've been captured. So again, if the Joker escapes, if the Joker's not found guilty and executed, that's on the system. That's not on Batman. I don't want to embolden Batman any more than he already is.
Interesting. And actually I like that distinction you made with Moshe, that it was still going to get done. Aaron was going to do it, but that's very interesting as opposed to, the Chazit Shota. And then on a related note, and you've kind of already addressed this specifically with Batman, but these superheroes, obviously, I mean, Batman is not a superhero, but he does have extraordinary resources that I guess Musk is now a trillionaire. But so in terms of the vast majority of people don't have Bruce Wayne's resources. Spider-Man obviously has incredible superpowers. Superman is almost like the golden standard of superpowers. Do those superpowers almost obligate them to take the law into their own hands? There is a certain level of power that they have that other people, regular people, don't have, and perhaps even no individual in the government has. So would we kind of look to them to be like, hey guys, we kind of need you to step in here?
Yes and no. Everyone has an obligation to do what's necessary to help other people. If someone, as I've mentioned, is in imminent danger, we all have to save them. If someone is needy, we all have to help them. If you have more ability to do so, then yes, you have to do it to the measure of your ability. Somebody who makes $100,000 a year giving, $1,000 donation is not the same as Elon Musk giving $1,000 donation. You would expect more of a donation from Musk. But again, does that obligate them to dedicate their entire life to looking for trouble? No, I don't think so. I think when the situation arises, they have to step in. Certainly, if you're Clark Kent, you can do more than if you're not. But like I said, I don't think he has to spend his life flying around Metropolis, looking for construction cranes, toppling. I think coming across things organically is sufficient. If he chooses to do that for a living, to be a super first responder, then hey, that's great. But I don't think we can obligate anyone in that lifestyle choice.
And then moving on, and this is where we're going to loop back into the Avengers, the Civil War. So kind of almost like the third tier of questions I had was, do we ever believe that someone is above the law? And the reason why this comes up specifically in it's a Captain America movie, but it's really kind of an Avengers movie. There's this debate among the Avengers whether or not they should submit themselves to the UN. And what's interesting is, Tony Stark, Iron Man, is effectively saying like, we've made some serious mistakes and we need to, or I don't know if it was him or Black Widow, but the point is kind of yes, we should submit ourselves to the UN. That role says we've made some serious mistakes and we need to earn the public trust again. And Captain America is saying, he's like, while I hear this, we don't want to give up our right to choose. Like, it's in our hands. We have this power and we want to choose how to deploy that power. And they argue and they eventually fight about it. Do we submit to a legal authority or not? And I guess that, again, just tuning it back to one line is anyone kind of above the law? It's kind of interesting, like what gives a person the moral, what gives the law the moral right? We know laws that, this came up in law school, in constitutional law. There's this idea of natural law and legal positivism. Natural law is effectively the idea that there are certain just like intrinsic moral traits that everyone agrees to, and like we have to trust those kind of moral intuitions. And on the other hand, you have legal positivism, which says what makes right is whether or not it was passed into law. The issues with the second one are obvious. Nazi Germany passed laws that I think the vast majority of humans would agree were completely immoral. But on the other hand, this idea of relying on moral intuition can make a person nervous. But that's effectively what is we're concerned about. Does anyone have the right to kind of say, we are above the law, we do not submit to legal bodies, and we want to make the choices ourselves, like how to operate and when to operate?
I don't believe anybody's above the law. I don't believe that in civil law. I don't believe that in Torah law. I don't believe that in superhero movies. Everyone is responsible to adhere to the law, whatever that law may be. So in the Torah, for example, who are the greatest authorities? Prophets, the Kohen Gadol, the king, all of whom were subject to laws. None of them could act in every sphere with impunity. You may remember the story of Achav, King Ahab, who wanted a certain vineyard. And he couldn't just confiscate it. His wife actually engineered the owner's death so that he could then take it because the guy had been framed as a rebel to the crown. But he couldn't just take it. Even the king was bound by the laws. So, yeah, even people with great power still have limits to those powers. And speaking of the superhero realm, there's actually a series called Injustice, Gods Among Us. It was a series of series because they did follow-ups to it. There was a video game, it was a whole thing. And the premise of that actually starts, the Joker kills Lois Lane. So Superman kills the Joker. And once that quirk is removed, going back to the previous discussion, there's no stopping him. There's no stopping Superman at that point. And he just takes over the world. And it's a utopia if you like that there's no crime. And it's quite the opposite if you like freedom. So there's two factions. Batman, of course, leads the other faction, trying to free the world from Superman's reign. So there are those who fall in with Superman's line of thinking, that we should just control the world and everyone should do what we say because we're right. And then there's those who, no, flawed as it is, people have to have, free will. So yeah, bad things happen when people imagine themselves above the law. Superman more so than most. So yeah, I'm not a fan of that idea, and I would be hard pressed to be convinced otherwise.
Right. So that's a good point about the kings. I actually remember hearing this concept that I think it's actually the last mitzvah in the Torah is the last commandment in the Torah is for every person to write a Sefer Torah, right? That they're obligated to do so. And then the king of Israel, has an additional obligation to write himself another Sefer Torah. And the way I heard it from like one of my Rabbi, one of my rabbis from Yeshiva, Rabbi Bernstein, he was quoting someone else. I don't remember the exact source, but he was saying how the king has two Sefer Torahs, and he's quoting a Hasidic source that because one, he's supposed to keep on his person at all times. And the reason why is because, again, as the king, he does have certain permissions that most people don't have. But ultimately, when he goes out into the world and does his thing and, builds society and hopefully does the right thing, when he comes back home, he's supposed to take his personal Torah and match it up to the Torah at home and make sure that they're still aligned in terms of you are still bound by the law. You might have certain exceptions that you're allowed to do that no one else is allowed to do, but within limits. That's right. Can we actually just that's such an interesting point. Can we actually just explore that more? Because it sounds like you said, in Torah law, no one is above the law. And that I think is actually really interesting because the Avengers, like, what moral authority, which legal authority are they going to adhere to? Because their point is, it's always people behind these laws. You go to the U.S. government, the Congress will change. You go to the UN, the representatives will change. I think you and I might have a very different perspective on the UN and how trustworthy it is. But so let's just take it for granted that it's an authentic. But the point is, whose authority are they going to answer to? It's ultimately just another person's. And in Torah law, it's not quite the same. We certainly do not see it that way. The Torah is not made up by people. And I want to explore that because it sounds like in Torah law, literally no one is above the law. Do we have specific examples of this?
Well, that's exactly right. The king has certain authority that the average person doesn't have. He can execute. He can't execute someone just because he doesn't like his face, but there are reasons for which he can execute. He doesn't have to go through the courts. But that doesn't give him carte blanche. And you know the saying, power corrupts absolutely. That's what it is. The more power you have, the more likely you are to think you have more power. And the king is in particular danger of that. And that's why, as you said, he has to carry a Sefer Torah with him. He has to remember that he's still bound by authority. He may have authority over you and you and you and you and you, but there's an end to it. There's a limit to it. Uh, and it's the same for everyone. No one in Judaism has carte blanche to do whatever they want whenever they want. And in civil law, it should be the same. And I hope it's the same.
Would you draw like, is this almost impossible to kind of draw that comparison between Jewish law and civil law? Because ultimately we understand that civil law is made by man. I think the reason why people are maybe sympathetic to the Avengers, again, as long as they use good judgment, to their argument that we don't want to submit to a legal authority, because whose legal authority are you going to submit to? Let's just say the Avengers were under the auspices of Trump. If you love Trump, that's not an issue. If you hate Trump, now suddenly you're really concerned, right? Or like we would be concerned if I can say so, trying as hard as I can not to get political, but here goes. I think you and I would be very concerned about the UN having access to people like the Avengers and what would then happen to Israel. Because when you have, I think, was it Iran is on like the Human Rights Commission, they just murdered tens of thousands of their own civilians, and now they're going to have access to, quote unquote, like these gods, deities, and these people's these superpowers that they could just deploy. Like I'd be like, I'd prefer the Avengers have their, don't be under the auspices of the UN. Make your own choices. Like use your brain. So I think to like phrase the question, is there a difference in our perspective based on like, we feel comfortable with saying no one's above the law, even the king, even the Kohen Gadol, right? The high priest, even a prophet, they are not above the law because it's Torah law, and therefore God is the ultimate decisor, as opposed to civil law where people are, and people are corruptible.
The law is the law. One of the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noah, the laws that were given to Noah, which apply to all of mankind, not just the Jews. One of the 7 laws is to establish courts of justice. So God requires of every society to come up with a system of justice, and they won't all necessarily match. There can be different systems of justice, but they have to be just. That's the thing. And we can argue, whether a system is better or worse. The saying, democracy is the worst form of government except for all others. You know what I'm saying? So there's a lot of gray area in what humans will come up with. And I mean, let's just say 150 years ago or 200 years ago, having slaves was perfectly moral, but things that they now march for in New York City would have gotten you thrown in jail. So I'm referring to the Pride March, things like that. And now it's the opposite. And by the way, 150, 200 years from now, things that we think are normal will be immoral, and things that we think are immoral will be accepted. And this is human nature. It's been this way throughout history. So yeah, what humans come up with is going to change. I think we can agree that certain things are inherently right and wrong. Actually, no, maybe we can't agree that, because like I said, once upon a time, they were fine with slavery. But still, you got to use seichel, and you're right. Governments will come up with corrupt laws. I remember way back in the day, I'm going to date myself with this, South Africa, when it was an apartheid state. I remember reading in Time magazine or Newsweek, one of those when we had magazines, that the president of South Africa, before it's became free, was saying, well, in the United States, you vote based on, age and this and that, and we do it based on, who owns property. We're democratic too, but our people get to vote based on owning land. So you don't own land, you don't get a vote. So, it swings in one particular direction. Is that the best system? No, I do not think that's the best system, but it was a system, and morals will change. So, yeah, obviously, if we have a corrupt system, you want the Avengers to operate to a higher authority. You want them to be more moral than that. But the Avengers are also just people using their best judgment. And there have been stories with corrupt Avengers. If you recall the supervillain, I guess, team, the Gatherers, which was made up of counterpart Avengers from all sorts of different parallel worlds, and they were the bad guys. It happens. We've seen bad versions of Superman and Batman and Spider-Man and all these guys on parallel worlds. So everyone's doing their best, but nobody's incorruptible. Nobody's, morally pure. We're all just doing our best.
Right, it's a good point. And actually, I mean, effectively, what's his name, like Highlander or something in the Boys, or Homelander. Sorry, Homelander.
Homelander,
Yeah,
yes.
Homelander was effectively evil Superman, and yeah, I don't think anyone felt comfortable with him having the powers that he had.
Yeah,
But
but he
actually, to address
certainly made himself look good.
there's something right. That's very interesting. Though. That's what this like South African president's justification was. Because if I recall correctly, I actually think that's how the Greeks did it. Greeks, the founders of democracy, I think had it. You could vote if you owned land. I'm not 100% certain. I'd obviously have to check. I did not look that up before this episode, but I think that is how they operated. So he actually has pretty good precedent to operate off of. And I think, like you said, most of us would not accept that understanding of democracy at all. But that is one understanding. And I have to say, I actually love the idea that you brought in those like the seven Noahide laws that apply to all of humanity. That it's kind of like you're saying, like that is God's will. God's will is like God's law is set up laws, and that's as long as it's just, then you're good to go. And I actually remember he was one of my coolest professors in law school. I think he's actually the dean right now of WashU, but he taught crim law. And he said during the Amanda Knox cases, just a brief summary, Amanda Knox was this American girl who was an exchange student in Italy, and under kind of some very suspicious, odd circumstances, her boyfriend was killed, died, whatever, in her apartment. And she went through 3 trials. The first one, she was convicted. And then the second one, she was exonerated. And as soon as that happened, she left for the US. And then outside of her presence, they tried her again and convicted her again of murder. Now, she's in the US, so she didn't go back to Italy, so she's out of jail, as far as I recall. But there was a whole scandal about this. The Americans were just, trashing the Italian justice system. 3 cases, the exact same charges, unbelievable, totally unacceptable. And WashU is a good law school, and so they had international students. And there was one Italian girl that was not backing down, would not be bullied by the Americans, was like, that's the way to go. This is 100% correct. And, people were like, and she just was like going hard. And my professor was, again, just being really cool, would ask her, like, when people were kind of mocking her in the Italian justice system, she said, yeah, that's because Italians value truth and you don't. We want to get to the truth. Like, we want to get down to the truth. And as many cases as it takes, that's what we're going to do. Something like that. And my professor, to his incredible credit, you'll see why he's so cool, he thought about it. And the next day he said, I agree with you. You're right. The top priority of the U.S. justice system is not truth. It's process. As long as they get due process, that's good. That's not saying they don't care about truth. That's not the point. But what we're saying is, you have one. What's the idea? Why doesn't the American justice system allow for multiple courts? Because the government is this huge, powerful entity with, supposedly unlimited resources that could try you and harass a person for life. So what we're telling you is, officers of the court, be it the police, be it the prosecution, you have one chance to get this person. And if you mess it up, too bad. You have to stop after that. The Italians are like, effectively, what happened was in the first case, the cops were kind of botching this. They weren't really researching the evidence properly. They're effectively doing it lackadaisically. And that's why there are so many different courts. But what was amazing was he admitted it. He's like, you're right. The Italians value truth. As many cases as it takes, we'll keep running it down until we get to the proper result. But Americans value due process. That was the highest. Now, again, you could disagree with that understanding, but I just thought it was interesting that, again, as long as a justice system makes sense and it has certain rules that it follows consistently, then you're allowed to have a different legal system. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I remember the Amanda Knox case, but I wasn't aware that she was tried in absentia after she returned to the States. And to us, that would be anathema because double jeopardy. It's so ingrained in us that once you're exonerated, that's the end of it. But as you rightly pointed out, there are different legal systems and they all have some merit and they all have some flaw. That's because we're humans.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I just thought it was such we were already talking about the idea of establishing courts of law. And this was 9 years ago, I think, when I first heard this. I mean, it was 8 years ago. But it was such like wow. I mean, first, to be told that your justice system is not concerned with truth, that's not your top priority, I would think is a super, I mean, that's a really, I was like, whoa, like way to come off strong. But the fact that he had the integrity to just think about it, process it, and then respond in kind, and you could understand, like the way he explained the different priorities of different legal systems, you're like, okay, like, you know, I hear the Italian perspective and I hear the American perspective. Which one you prefer? I mean, whatever, as long as you're consistent and you try to be as fair as you can. I want to move to hidden identity, but before we get to that, I have one more question on this specific point in terms of what is the difference between like a vigilante and a villain. One of the whole points was, are vigilantes above the law? You know, should we take, you know, can they take the law into their own hands? Having personal boundaries. All of this is effectively to differentiate a vigilante from a villain. But for many, there is no difference. You can't take the law into your own hands. And it sounds like, based on like, you know, the Jewish perspective, we would say the same. You are not above the law. You can't do that. So can we just clarify what, in Judaism, is it just like point blank? If you are taking the law into your own hands without permission, you are definitionally a villain. Or do we say no? There is a difference between a person who's like a, you know, Homelander and Superman.
I think that saying you're automatically a villain is maybe too broad a stroke. But I mean, if you think about the Punisher, when he first showed up in Spider-Man, killing criminals, he was a villain. He was definitely a villain. There have been other villains whose modus operandi is they kill only criminals. The TV show Dexter is about a guy who kills serial killers. That's what he does. He has the urge to kill, but he does a public service by killing other serial killers. He doesn't kill innocents. Okay, that's a certain level, but he's still a criminal. He's still a villain. I wouldn't call Superman a villain. I think that he's operating extra legally. I think that what he does wouldn't hold up in court. You know, like I said, I'm happy if he's there when a crane is falling, or you know, when the moon is about to crash into the earth or whatever. You know, it's good to have Superman around. But like I said, I don't think these guys should be looking for trouble. But that doesn't necessarily make them villains. Depending on what they do, they could be a nuisance. You know, but. I think of the three that we made our crux, Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, I think Batman is the most problematic. Spider-Man, you know, like I said, you know, so he catches a mugger and webs him up. The guy walks. All right, so, you know, Spider-Man, I think would get a slap on the wrist. Batman, I think they'd lock him up and throw away the key.
Right. Fair enough. Okay, cool. Yeah, now moving for a moment to hidden identities. And I know this isn't exactly with, this may not be under like the full umbrella under like taking the law into your own hands, but I think this is a moral dilemma that is often faced by superheroes. But the idea of having a hidden identity, of not telling everyone who you are, or at least even your loved ones. Because I think you don't owe it to a stranger in the street to tell, you know, for people, like Clark Kent to say Superman, same with Bruce Wayne, same with Peter Parker. All those people aren't obligated to tell everyone. But should they tell, like, there was a recent TV show, I think that just ended, Superman and Lois, where he didn't tell his teenage kids, his two boys, that he was Superman until they were teenagers. And maybe just being emotional teenagers, or for the sake of drama, this is a TV show, one of the sons gets really upset. He's like, you know, you're so absent as a father in so many cases, like, I can't, you know, like, I mean, he gets upset. Or like in the Spider-Man movies with Andrew Garfield, right? MJ, or his MJ, finds out that he's Spider-Man, ends up helping him, and dies in the process. So on the one hand, they might get upset about the deception. On the other hand, they might get too involved. Or the villains might, once they know who, you know, Superman is Clark Kent, they'll go after Lois Lane. Lois Lane doesn't have superpowers. She's not invulnerable. So on the one hand, you have this idea of you're effectively deceiving a loved one. But on the other hand, it's for their own protection. Like, when do we toe the line? When do we eventually tell, like, you know, a superhero or vigilante, hey, like, you have to fess up. You can't hide from everyone. You need to tell certain people. At what point is it permissible deception? When is it just breach of trust?
That's a difficult question. Well, first of all, in terms of your kids and, you know, I don't think you necessarily ever tell them. There are people who do secret work for a living and they don't tell their families. I think that if you're dating or married, it might be a different situation. Again, depending on how much discretion the situation has. If you're a secret agent working for the government, you know, if you're, you know, a deep cover agent, then you may not have the liberty to tell someone, even if you want to. If you're Green Lantern, yeah, you probably could tell them if you want to. But I don't know that I would tell my kids because forget about whether or not that would endanger them or not endanger them. I don't know how it would because who's going to know to act on that information? Uh, Kids are dumb. And kids tell secrets. Oh yeah, well my father's Green Lantern. So I'm not so sure. I might wait until they're adults to bring that up. But I think you might have a moral obligation to a spouse. I think that if you're dating someone and you're Spider-Man, it's not exactly first date conversation. This is an issue I have with the shidduch system. Sometimes I answer questions for the local dating column, in my newspaper here, and I'm a big fan of what I don't think you have to tell everyone all your stuff too early in the relationship. Because, if you tell everybody everything on the fourth date and it doesn't work out, you got like 500 people around who know your business. And that defeats the purpose of it being your business. But I think if you're getting ready to get married to someone, yeah, you better know, listen, I'm not going to be home nights because I'm swinging around the city, looking to wed muggers to light poles. I mean, that's just, I think at that point it has to come up. And then, of course, there's an aspect of trust. If the relationship doesn't work out, is Mary Jane going to go to the National Enquirer, which was a newspaper when we had newspapers? But that could be also if Superman and Lois get divorced, and if it doesn't go well, I mean, you gotta have trust in people. So I think it's very much an individual call, but I don't think there's any grand overarching obligation at this point. You must tell this person. I definitely think if you're married and if it's a discretionary thing, not like a government thing where you're not allowed to tell, then yeah, you got to share. But beyond that, I don't think. And I don't know that in the 1960s, the Silver Age, Superman's big excuse for never proposing to Lois Lane was, oh, if they knew we were married, life would be in constant danger from my enemies because it's not constantly in danger from everyone knowing she's your girlfriend. I mean, just that was an excuse. That wasn't a reason. That was an excuse.
Interesting. I guess so that makes sense, but I guess just there's this concept in Judaism. I think it might even be, I think it's a pasuk, it's a verse, like midvar sheker tirchak. You should distance yourself from a false matter. So I guess it sounds like, yeah, well, it's up to your discretion. It's like, well, is it? I mean, there must be legal parameters to when a person is allowed to lie. Like in terms of what we're concerned, if you're a secret agent, then I'm assuming at that point, like you're bound by actual civil law. But if you're Superman, I mean, you're not a government, again, assuming you're a vigilante. The point is you're not operating with the government auspices. Like the Torah says, distance yourself from a false matter. Like it seems like don't lie unless there's some fine point I'm missing here.
Well, see, that's the thing. It's what's a question of lying? Not everyone needs to know your business. Not everyone deserves to know your business. So if I walk up to someone and I ask him a personal question, he can lie because it's not his business. He doesn't owe me an answer. And there are a number of people who have disguised themselves in Tanakh. I mean, putting aside the question of Yaakov who dressed up like Esav, because that's a tough one, and they discuss, because the whole situation appears to be a little sketchy.
Yeah. Sorry, can you just flesh out the situation just for people?
Sure. When Yitzchak wanted to bless Esav, his older son, Yaakov's mother had him put goat skins on his arms so he would feel hairy like his brother Esav, and told him to go in and bring his father the food so that he, Yaakov, would get the blessing. And when he says, who are you? He says, Ani Esav Bechorcha, I, Esav, your oldest son. And then they justify that he said two statements. Who are you? It is I. Esav is your firstborn son. So, like they kind of play games with the words. But there the whole thing is that Yaakov appears to be stealing the blessings. But of course, once Yitzchak learned that he had been deceived, he says, the one I blessed gets to keep the blessings, because he recognized with the benefit of hindsight that was the way it was supposed to be. But putting that case aside, which is what I was saying, Tamar disguised herself when she intercepted Yehud at the crossroads. Shaul disguised himself, King Saul, when he went to visit the witch of Endor. The wife of Yeravam, who was the king of the breakaway kingdom of the 10 tribes. She disguised herself when she went to visit the prophet Yichah Hashiloni. King Ahab, Achav, who we mentioned earlier, when he went into battle, he took off his royal garb and put on regular soldier clothes so that he wouldn't be recognizable as the king. There was a case, actually, speaking of Achav, a certain Navi whose name we're not given, wrapped himself in bandages and went in disguise to King Achav with a prophecy and basically told him an untrue story to see the king's reaction, and then told him, based on your reaction, this is what's going to happen. There are plenty of cases, and people also conceal their intentions. For example, Yael, who killed Sisera.
I think Yael did, yeah, because I think there's Yehudis who killed, I think, a Greek general, and then Yael killed Sisera. I think that's right.
Killed Sisera, yeah, killed Sisera. Because Yael and Yehudis always kind of merge together in the brain. Yael killed Sisera. She certainly misled him about her intentions. Yehoshua had 2 spies who went undercover to check out, Jericho before attacking it. Ehud Ben Gera was one of the Shoftim. He certainly went to Eglon, king of Moab, under false pretenses, lied about his intentions. Esther hid her identity from Achashverosh and everybody. There's basically, there are plenty of cases we see that people went undercover, either by concealing their identity or by lying about their motivations. And with the exception of Yaakov, who we struggle to understand, because like I said, he appears to have done it for theft, which again, with the benefit of hindsight, et cetera, was not the case. Remember, his mother had a prophecy that he was the one who was going to perpetuate the line and not Esav. So she had inside information that Yitzchak didn't have. So Rivka, was behind it. Yaakov didn't want to do it. Rivka made him do it. But the point is that with the exception of that one, which we struggle to understand, none of these people are criticized for going undercover. Even someone like Achav, for all the things that we complain about him that he did, he was a terrible king, terrible person. No one criticizes him that he dressed up like a foot soldier, So
right, fascinating. I actually want to, because those are all cases I think we can understand. Again, the idea of trying to conceal their identity from a prophet is actually really funny, but like
did not work.
Yeah. But focusing on Esther because again, those other cases you could say they're going undercover, they have a specific mission, deceit is part of the job. I get that. But that's not quite the same thing as, like, say, Superman lying to Lois or Spider-Man lying to MJ or, I don't know. I don't think Batman actually, I guess he has a love interest, but or lying to your kids. But Esther and Achashverosh, that is very interesting. Are there any commentaries on the correctness? Because she did that for years. She hid her identity. In fact, he would ask her, where are you from? And she wouldn't. She was like, I can't say.
Well, the thing about Esther and Achashverosh is, remember, they were married, but it wasn't exactly on even footing. She was there under duress. She did not choose to be there. There's that whole situation where she finally has to go to him willingly, take on initiative. So yeah, that is not a relationship founded on trust. That's a relationship founded on Achashverosh having executioners, which in the past he has not been shy about using. So, right. I hesitate to say that the normal rules of marital trust and relationships apply to them.
Got it. So, well, if that's the case, then we would say that superheroes should not then, if they go into a relationship willingly, so that's with a spouse, but I guess with kids, should a person deceive his children? I mean, you could see how this would create breach of trust. So I'm just trying to explore the idea of where we showed a lot of examples of how when it came to third parties, you're allowed to lie. With Esther and Achashverosh, which is probably the closest, again, she was there under duress. He's the king and Achashverosh forced Esther to be in that relationship. And that I also understand, but why the difference between, say, a spouse and children? Children are dumb, but then do you eventually tell them when they're 20, 25, when you could tell if they could keep a secret?
I might tell them when they're adults. A spouse, obviously, like I said, to get into that relationship, I think the person deserves to know what they're getting into. So, yeah, I think Lois Lane deserves to know. I think Mary Jane, if they're at that stage of the relationship, and depending which continuity, Brand New Day or whatever, I think she deserves to know. But like I said, the kids, you can't tell them when they're too young because they're going to blab.
Right. Sure. And yeah, I mean, Superman's your dad. You're going to tell everybody. Right. Can my dad get up your dad? It's trust me, he can.
And by the time they're 16, 17, you know your kid by that point. And already then you have an opinion whether or not you should tell them, how trustworthy they'll be, what they'll do with that information. If the kid is messed up because his father was an absentee dad, would the fact that his father was an absentee dad because he was Superman and you can't tell anyone have made it any better? I don't know that would have. I mean, I always say, whatever you do, your kids are going to end up on the psychiatrist's couch. It's just a question of what they're going to be saying. So I don't think that would have saved Superman Jr. from any trauma that he may have experienced. I think it would just be different trauma.
And then another question would be, often these superheroes have a normal persona, right? Like there's Clark Kent or Peter Parker or both reporters, interestingly, and Batman. To what degree do they, like there's a case in like Man of Steel, the first Henry Cavill movie, where it's really like odd in terms of, so he's a young Clark is in a school bus. I'm assuming he's probably around 12. I think the driver has some kind of emergency and drives off of the bridge into the water. It's going into the water. All the kids are going to drown, and Clark decides to act. He is not in costume. He's with his classmates. They all know who he is. And he actually saves the bus, right? He saves everyone's lives. And one of the students saw Clark before he was able to escape and then said, like, hey, like, Clark, like, you saved us. You clearly are how did you do that? How did you push a bus out of the water? And they effectively had to lie. Like, they're like, no, it's not true. Your kid was just delusional. He didn't really see things. And then when Clark was speaking to his father afterwards, Clark was like, well, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to drown? Like, let them drown? And the father was like, maybe. Yeah, like maybe. Now that sounds crazy, dude. You can let people die because you don't want to reveal your identity. So I want to hear that in terms of, on the one hand, you have an obligation to act. On the other hand, you could kind of maybe see Superman's father, like, you should keep your identity hidden. Under all things being equal, a superhero is allowed to keep his secrets. When you have this breaking point where you have to make a choice, either you're keeping your identity secret, or you're taking action and you're saving someone. What does Judaism say about that?
I think it's got to be a case-by-case situation. I don't think there's one size fits all. Okay, so what's the ramification of your identity being revealed? The question really is, would the identity being revealed destroy their ability to do their job? So you've got, undercover cops who sometimes have to allow, more than sometimes, probably always have to allow criminal activity to go unimpeded because to act would reveal who they secretly are. Agents who go undercover, the people who made the pagers that exploded, things like that. I think that they have to keep their eye on the mission. Other times, if it's just an inconvenience, will my mission be impeded or will just I be inconvenienced? So, yeah, Superman might not be able to be Superman if everyone knows he's Clark Kent. It would destroy his life. The guy couldn't operate. Same thing, Batman, Bruce Wayne. I don't see how this guy could keep doing the job if his identity is publicly known. So then you got to make a decision. Do you act if it means destroying the big picture mission? Now, in the case of Pa Kent telling young Clark Kent not to reveal himself, he wasn't Superman yet. I don't know that was good advice. I think it was bad advice. Later situations, if Superman has to let something bad happen so as not to reveal himself, it might be prudent. But I don't think, like 9/11, if Clark Kent was there and meant revealing himself, yeah, then I think, I think you got to do it to stop 9/11. But I can't evaluate. It's really got to be an individual, situational aspect. Because like I said, there are definitely cases where cops and other people who go undercover have to stick to their role. That doesn't give them carte blanche to kill innocent people. An undercover cop can't go around killing people because he's pretending to be a murderer. But still, he does have to let drug deals go down and whatever else he turns a blind eye to.
Interesting. So we'd say that there's a difference between like being passive and being, you can't be an active, but it sounds like even that may be too sharp a line. Like sometimes an undercover cop can actively kill innocent people, right? But
I assume not. I hope so.
Right. No, I would assume, right. I would assume the same. But you could allow things to passively happen. But then
Have to.
I think that's fair, right? I think that's fair in terms of it's an individual. How can you make a carte blanche? Like, was it? How inconvenienced? How seriously will that jeopardize his mission? Fair enough. Yeah, that's. I guess if I can just ask, is there like a specific? I mean, that makes sense. But is there a Torah source like this idea of we allow such things to happen? Like we're allowed to passively allow.
I'm not saying that halacha doesn't apply to it, but again, I couldn't tell you all the specifics because I think there's very much going to be case by case situations.
That's fair. And perhaps I wonder if this. I don't know if this is applicable. I'm just trying to think live. Maybe we can just brainstorm together. But like that famous case of if you're in the desert with one other person and you're like there's only enough water for one of you, then Rabbi Akiva says, and this is the halacha, this is Jewish law, that if you have enough water for either you or the other person, and if you split it, you're both going to die. And if you give it to the other person, then you're going to die. You are allowed to drink your own water. And even
More
if
than allowed,
that
obligated.
allows, sorry, you're obligated to drink your own water, even if passively you're effectively allowing the other person to die. Is that applicable here?
You didn't put him in that situation. Life put him in that situation. That was God's arrangement, not yours. So you couldn't take his canteen, but you also can't take your canteen.
And give it to him. Got it. Interesting. I guess, yeah, because okay, fair enough. There's a whole idea of like, what's the bigger picture here?
I think we can all agree that if Jimmy Olsen found out Clark Kent was Superman, Superman would not be justified in roasting him alive with the heat vision in order to keep his secret. But if Jimmy Olsen fell off a building, would he have to jump out as Clark Kent to save him? He might choose to, but I don't know that he would be obligated to in that case if it would compromise his big picture mission.
All right, fair enough. And
I personally think he would, but again, I can't evaluate what Superman's big picture mission is. My frame of reference is FBI, police, people who are legitimately going undercover because they have a specific mission to fulfill. Batman and Superman, honestly, they're self-appointed. I don't know that they have these missions to fulfill. And honestly, like I said, I don't know that letting Batman do whatever he does is a good idea to start with. So like I said, assuming from their point of view that they have missions to fulfill and these missions would be compromised, then I guess that they could justify passive casualties. I would like to think they wouldn't. I would like to think they would reveal their identities and have to find new ways of doing their jobs. But then again, I would hope they would do their jobs with proper oversight to begin with. So they're doing a lot of things that I don't agree with, that in the real world I would have problems with. But again, if Superman existed, good luck telling him what to do. Unless you have, a kryptonite reserve, you're kind of at his whim. But yeah, so it's strictly a hypothetical. Like I said, can I justify Batman letting somebody die so he can keep on doing what he shouldn't be doing in the first place? Yeah, if I put myself in Batman's mind, I can justify it. But like I said, if I was reading a comic book, I would like a Batman who was better than that.
I have two final questions. The first is there anything I should have asked or that we should have addressed that we haven't? And if so, are there any additional points that you would like to make before we wrap up?
No, I think you've covered a broad spectrum of questions on this topic. I think it's an interesting exercise. I think in the real world, I would have a lot more issues with it than I do hypothetically. But no, I think that was a good introduction to the topic.
Just one additional question, because I really liked your answer. One of the justifications that you'll often hear superheroes give, or that you might be give, is, this is made by a thing like Black Widow or Iron Man, was getting the public trust, getting people's trust. Superman certainly voices this in the Superman and Lois, that when he came on the scene, there was a lot of debate in terms of what he can be doing with his powers, what he could do. So he had to earn people's trust. This is the theme of Batman versus Superman, with Batman seeing what Superman is capable of doing, these Kryptonians who are destroying the city, and again, earning people's trust. Like if there's a 1% chance that Superman could go rogue, we have to destroy him. And so my question is it possible for these superheroes to perhaps not act with government authority, but to act with if people agree with what we're doing, then we're good to go? What if public opinion turns against the vigilante, right? If the public opinion is with the vigilante, good to go. If public opinion is against the vigilante, then we're not good to go. Then he should stop. How much weight do we give public opinion when it comes to weighing in on the vigilante's authority?
If what they're doing is right, it's right, even if everybody hates their guts. And if what they're doing is wrong, it's wrong, even if everybody likes them. I mean, slavery was popular, Hitler was popular, Israel is very unpopular. But what's right is right and what's wrong is wrong. The police have been on many occasions unpopular, but they're still the law. And rioters, sometimes they're very popular because people agree with their cause, but they're still breaking the law. So making vigilantes subject to a popularity contest, that's a dangerous game.
That's great. And then if you can you kind of just give like a quick, maybe 2 or 3 minute summary, just in bullet points, like the issues you addressed and what the Jewish perspective is?
Well, I think that the main topic was vigilantism in terms of superheroes. And from a Jewish perspective, we don't believe in vigilantism. Cases that people popularly perceive to be people acting as vigilantism are actually very narrowly defined areas of working within the law, just being given the ability to do so unilaterally at their discretion. But they still are subject to all sorts of restrictions and parameters, and by no means is it carte blanche for anyone. No one is above the law, not even the king. The king has to remember to whom he is subject, and he has to act within the parameters of the laws of the king, which, granted, have a lot more leeway than the laws of commoners, but they still have limits. So I think that's that. Every society has an obligation to enforce justice. Not every society will agree what that entails. I think that superheroes, if they existed, should be subject to a society's morals. Granted, a society can be corrupt, in which case you'd like to think that the superheroes would act according to a higher morality, but the superheroes are also able to be corrupted. So in all these cases, we're relying on human judgments. We're not relying on divine mandates, unfortunately. And finally, we discussed secret identities. And I think that keeping a secret identity is both precedented and justified. I think that if you're going to do these things, which again, I question whether one should be doing, but putting yourself in the mindset of a Batman or a Superman, I think you can understand why they'd want to keep it secret. I think you can understand why they feel their ability to operate would be compromised if their identity got out. And I don't think that the obligation to distance yourself from a false matter means necessarily making public things that are private. So there's that. And unfortunately, I think that Batman and Superman could justify letting innocents passively die if they had to protect their identities, but I'd like to think they wouldn't.
Fantastic. Rabbi, this was great. Thank you so much for taking the time. You clearly thought, this was very well thought out, great answers, very succinct and to the point. And I really appreciate you taking the time to come on to the podcast and field these questions.
Oh, a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. All right. Have a good one. Thank you for tuning in to the Dilemmas on Screen, a Jewish Perspective podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe. If you have any suggestions for a moral dilemma you'd like analyzed, feel free to send it over. Thanks again, and see you next time.